Thank you very much. It's a great honour to speak here at this 80th birthday party and also to be appointed the champion for space. UNUSA, the Office for Outer Space Affairs, they said to me when I was offered the position, which I gladly accepted, that it's the smallest office in the UN with the biggest remit, which is everything other than Earth. Space is going to become a bigger and bigger part, I think, not only of the UN, but of the world as a whole. In just a couple of figures, the space economy is growing at 9% per year. A McKinsey report recently suggested that it would be worth $2 trillion, maybe more, by 2035. And here in the UK, House of Lords report recently found that 18% of UK GDP, 18%, rests on or requires space-based infrastructure, of which we own and control very little. So you see that geopolitically, economically, space is going to become increasingly important. But I thought I'd talk for the next 10 minutes or so about a more philosophical view of why I think space is important, beyond the economics, beyond the geopolitics. This image is it's a very famous image and linked very closely with the UN, because it's an image, it was the first image taken of the Earth and Moon as a single system in a single frame. It was 1977, the Voyager spacecraft. And if you're lucky enough to go to the top floors of the UN in New York, you'll see in the corridor there's a lot of memorabilia based around Voyager, because the UN were intimately involved in building the Golden Record, which is the idea, a beautiful idea, that because these spacecraft launched in 1977 were on their way out of the solar system, then it should be the case that we put a message on the spacecraft if they were found. So in the event that they're found by an alien civilization, what would we like to communicate about Earth? So Voyager took this spacecraft on its way out of the solar system. And I should say we're still in touch with those two spacecraft now. They're engineering Triumph, 50th anniversary next year of their launch. They're transmitting with a power of 18 watts. And they have tape recorders on them because they're 1970s spacecraft, and they're still working and still recording data. So the Golden Record. The Golden Record is a wonderful thing. It's essentially vinyl because it's a 1970s spacecraft. But this is the cover of the Golden Record, and you'll see one at the UN in New York. On the cover, at the top, just at the top right-hand side there, are the instructions to build a record player. So the aliens, should they recover this record, which is obviously essential. By the way, that sort of spiky thing at the bottom left, that's a map of pulsars. So pulsars are stars that have reached the end of their lives, collapse to something like the size of a city, and spin round, and each one has a characteristic pulse, a characteristic period. And so they're like clockwork. So you can use those things to build a map of the local region of the galaxy that we sit in. And that is the map showing where we are, which was slightly controversial because the question was asked, is that a good idea? If some aliens find this, should we locate ourselves? But they're located. So if the aliens decode the record, then a committee was set up, and the UN were part of this committee, and NASA and so on, to decide what we should show the aliens. There's music on there are photographs. I heard that the music, they hired a very eminent musicologist who was asked which music should we put on the record, and they said we should put only Bach, but that would be showing off. So there's an eclectic mix of music. There are also some wonderful images. Of course, there's the UN building in New York. But the one that I love, I would have loved to be in this meeting, that's the representation of humanity on this image. Someone eating a ham and cheese toastie and drinking wine out of a jug. So I don't know who decided that was a good idea, but it's there. But the question does arise, how likely is it? Is there any way we can have an educated guess? How likely might it be that someone will find and decode this image? This is a photograph of the Milky Way galaxy, of our galaxy, put together by the European Southern Observatory. And it's photographs of our galaxy from all points around the Earth's surface, both northern and southern hemisphere. So this is the entire arc of the Milky Way across the sky. Now, there are somewhere between 200 and 400 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. We now know that virtually all of them have planetary systems. We've detected over 6,000 planets directly around stars in the Milky Way. So that allows us to do some reasonable statistics. And for example, we could estimate the number of potentially Earth-like planets in this galaxy. And that is somewhere between 10 and 20 billion. So 10 and 20 billion Earths potentially in this galaxy takes light about 100,000 years to cross it. So it's a big island of stars. Now, one of the great puzzles in astronomy, which has become known as the Great Silence, is that hard as we've tried using radio telescopes to listen and look for signals of other civilizations in this galaxy, we have heard nothing to date. The Great Silence. Frank Drake, who's one of the great astronomers, along with Carl Sagan, who pioneered the golden record and these messages from Earth. He died a few years ago, but he pioneered SETI. And I had the great honor of going to his house and speaking to him. And I arrived at his house, and he said to me that when we started turning radio telescopes to the skies in the 1950s, he thought that we would immediately hear other civilizations. We'd become part of a great galactic conversation, just based on the scale and the age of the galaxy, the amount of real estate in this galaxy that could support biology surely suggests that there should be others out there. But we heard nothing, and we've heard nothing to date. Now, Frank also collected orchids, and it turned out that when I went to his house, there was an orchid there that flowered, a very rare orchid, 1 day per year, this beautiful white orchid. And it was flowering the day that I arrived, and he took me to see it. And he said to me, he said, you know, maybe one of the reasons for the Great Silence is that civilizations are like this orchid. So they rise and then they fall in moments in galactic time, a galactic day, if you like. And therefore, they never overlap. And so there will have been others out there before, there will be others after us. But maybe, he speculated, it's almost like a law of nature, that maybe we've heard the challenges that an industrial civilization faces. We've heard many of them today. The challenge of nuclear weapons, for example. If you get to this point, you understand the atomic nucleus, the power and possibility of it. If you get to the point we are at, you challenge the climate, you industrialize. Therefore, you have to work as a single planet on these problems. And he speculated that maybe that's too hard. Maybe it's almost a law of nature, that our knowledge always exceeds our wisdom, and therefore civilization never get beyond this point, which is a rather miserable view of the Great Silence. But it could be right, but we're optimistic, of course. Another possibility is rooted in biology itself. But I just want to show you, that's one galaxy. I can't resist showing you this data. This is a data set. So we're one island of stars in a very big universe. This is a data set from a new instrument, a new collaboration called DAISY, which is the Dark Energy Spectroscopic Instrument, which is based at Kitt Peak in Arizona. And the job of this collaboration is to map the position and distance to galaxies in the sky. And this is a fly-through of their current data set as it was about a month or two ago. So every point in this fly-through is the measured position of a galaxy. And each of these galaxies is, on average, give or take, the size of the Milky Way, maybe anything up to 1 trillion stars, actually, in each of these points of light. So the galaxy, the universe itself, is a snowstorm of galaxies. These surveys allow us to estimate the number of galaxies it's possible to see in the observable universe. And that number is something like 2 trillion. So the UN-USA has a big remit, as I said before, 2 trillion galaxies. So returning to that question of life and biology, this is a photograph, this is the first photograph ever taken of the surface of Mars, 1965, by the Mariner 4 spacecraft. So a grainy black and white image. This caused celebration and consternation when it was announced at the press conference, NASA's press conference. Lyndon Johnson was the president at the time. And he gave a speech announcing this image, the first flyby of Mars. And it's really instructive, actually, because I think he ad-libbed a bit because he stuttered during the speech. And he said, looking at this image, it just may be, that Earth, with its humanity, is rather more rare than many had imagined. Because this is a photograph of an arid place. If you go back before this time, into the 60s, 50s, 40s, then it was many people assumed that there was at least vegetation on Mars. It is true, if you look at Mars with a telescope, you see shifting patterns, and that it was imagined that maybe those patterns were vegetation moving with the seasons. Go back a bit further, Percival Lowell very famously thought he saw canals on Mars, evidence of a dying civilization bringing water from the polar ice caps to the equatorial cities. So that was, that was in the air, this idea that at least there'll be something on Mars. And then they see this. And I think Johnson's reaction is really interesting. It may be that Earth, with its humanity, is more valuable than we'd otherwise assumed. Now, it turns out that maybe we don't have to be as pessimistic as Johnson and the NASA engineers and scientists in 1965. We have significantly better images now of Mars, of course. This is a very high-resolution image, beautiful image from the United Arab Emirates HOPE Mars mission, which has a particularly beautiful camera. And you see there that at least it's not quite as arid as that initial Mariner 4 photograph. You see evidence of geology there. You can see a big volcano there. That's Olympus Mons, the biggest volcano in the solar system. That thing is twice the height of Everest and the size of Poland. So there's big geology. The ice caps are water ice and carbon dioxide ice. So we have good evidence there. The water was present on Mars, may well still be. Well, it's frozen in the ice caps, but also may be liquid, perhaps subsurface. And possibly, we have some evidence that life may have existed on Mars. So I want to show you this, just the one scientific result I'd like to share with you, which is from last year, a paper published in Nature from the Perseverance rover on Mars. So this is a photograph of a piece of rock that's about 20 centimeters across. But there's a pattern there, which is known as the leopard spots pattern. So you see that you can see that pattern. That pattern is the chemistry, is it's water interacting with the iron minerals in the Martian soil, so the chemistry is understood. But that particular pattern, when seen on Earth, is only created by single-celled organisms, by bacteria. So it's possible that this is the discovery, that life existed on Mars. We don't know. It is notoriously difficult to make guesses or to try and understand alien geochemistry, so the claim is not yet made. What is clear, everybody I've spoken to has said if we could get this back to Earth, we'd know very soon, if that was created by microbes. So it's possible that we don't need to be as pessimistic about the origin of life. However, if we do find life on Mars, we are sure, or elsewhere in the solar system, we're pretty sure as we can be, that it will be microbes. And part of the reason for that is the history of life on Earth. So this is a photograph of the Burgess Shale in Canada, which is one of the oldest fossil beds on Earth. So you see fossils of trilobites and those things that we grow up with in dinosaur books. Many of them will have been found here. Those fossils are around 500, 550 million years old. On Earth, there is no evidence of anything more complex than a single cell back beyond about 600 million years, maybe 700 in the fossil record, 1 billion at the very most. And so a timeline of the history of life on Earth looks something like this. So 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth is formed. We have evidence that life was present around 3.8 billion years ago. So we have a 3.8 to 4 billion year history of life. However, there's no evidence of anything more complex than a single cell for over 3 billion years after life begins. That's the blue line. The green bit is the bit when complex multicellular life emerges. So that means plants on the land, anything complex in the oceans, and so on. And the little red blob, I don't know if you can even see that, but that's us. So that's an Australopithecus afarensis and our distant ancestors. So it took here 4 billion years to go from cell to civilization. And that leads many people that I speak to suggest that whilst simple life might be common in the Milky Way galaxy, complex life might be extremely rare indeed, because it's a big ask for a planet to be stable enough for long enough to support an unbroken chain of life for 4 billion years, which is what it took to make us. So another explanation possibly for the Great Silence is that we were extremely fortunate. And indeed, I asked a friend of mine who works in this area, how many civilizations do you think that might there be in a galaxy, like in this galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy? And he said, well, on average, per galaxy, I suspect the number is less than 1 because of the history of biology that we understand here on Earth. So that means that it's possible at least that we might be alone in this galaxy. Another friend of mine said, all that will be up there at best is slime, knowing what we know about the history of life on Earth. And that, I think, to summarize, delivers a perspective on our responsibility, the things we're talking about today. You know, I was asked to give a similar address. It was actually by video at the COP Climate Summit in Glasgow a few years ago. And I had about a minute to speak to the world leaders. And I think they thought I was going to say, hello, welcome to Glasgow, have a nice meeting, or something like that. But I thought, you know, I could just maybe make this argument very quickly that I've made to you this afternoon. So I did. So I said, it's possible that we're the only civilization in this galaxy. What does it all mean? Well, what is meaning? I would say that meaning, whatever it is an emergent property. I would say it emerges from complex biological systems. Without things as sophisticated as human brains, there are no thoughts. I would argue there's no meaning. So therefore, if this planet is the only place where complex biology exists, the only place where meaning currently exists, in a galaxy of 400 billion suns. So my message to them was, you are the world leaders. You are responsible for this place. And given what we know, therefore, if you destroy this ecosystem, this civilization, through deliberate action or inaction, that each of you will be personally responsible for destroying meaning in a galaxy of 400 billion suns, potentially forever. Have a nice meeting. And so thank you very much for listening. So my hope is, my mission statement for the future of the UN in the next 80 years would be, let's not do that. Thank you very much.